As an introduction, my name is John Odlum. I'm a registered veterinary surgeon in Queensland, and I've been in practice for 30 years. We've got a couple of problems in the profession, and I've been there for a long time. It's very much a cottage industry. The industry's self-esteem is very poor, and the job satisfaction and the number of people leaving the job and suicides is just terrible. They lack a lot of career path and career development. The practices themselves, in many cases, the presentation is very poor. There's some excellent practices out there, but some very poor presentation and very poor marketing. And then, of course, having that part of it being very poor, this reflects straight through to the clients and the patients. So our solution is to enlarge the group. We've been working with this for a number of years now, and we've got 31 practices contracted to come into our group. So what we're looking for at the moment is we have $14 million from the NAB Bank to start this off, subject, of course, to us getting an IPO, and we're looking for $30 million. The funds will be used to buy the 31 practices. It'll also be used for working capital, and in that working capital, we'll be employing some professional experts in certain areas, like marketing and HR and accountancy, etc. And we'll also be using some of the funds for acquisitions. But what's the security on your investment? You put the money in, what sort of security you've got? Well, the first thing I'd comment on is the experience of the team. I've been in practice for 30 years and running multiple practices for 25. I've had significant experience in industrial relations in both Queensland and Australia, representing the veterinary profession and the formation of a number of awards. Also been involved significantly in practice design, construction, renovations, and of course accounting and a lot of the IT that goes with all that thing, as well as considerable experience with property leases. Also involved in starting the first emergency with a team of people, emergency veterinary clinic in Brisbane, and that was one of the first in Australia. We've got Glenn, will be our CEO. He's extremely entrepreneurial. Glenn had 4 practices in Townsville, and he'd been running that for 15 years. My business partner, Keith, is a very high detail vet, very academic, expert vet, and he's still my partner today, by the way, my business partner. And then we've got Stephen, who's a veterinary specialist in Melbourne, registered specialist in dentistry, and he ran something like 10 practices, so there's a fair amount of experience there. As an IPO, of course, we're governed by the rules of the ASX, and that's fairly stringent. Where's that growth going to come from? Well, it's going to come from organic growth, and it's going to come from acquisitions. With the staff, what we intend to do, because as you know, the culture is so important in running a business, by having the expanded group, we'll be able to expand career opportunities. We'll be able to employ practice managers so that our vets and nurses just keep doing vets and nurses and not the rubbish out the back that all of us have to do, the administration. Our practice managers in many cases will come from other industries, so we get a diversity of opinion in our management team. The staff will be involved in a profit sharing scheme, and we also are very involved currently in teaching the staff the business, not the veterinary side of it. Previous owners of the practices that we're buying will be contracted to stay in the business for 2 years, and they're also on a percentage buyout. So it's in their interests, and they can get a bigger buyout if they support the whole development. The fifth part of it is we'll be able to run a thing called support office, not head office or administration office, but support office. Called support office because it's there to support the team. And that, of course, will employ the accountants and marketing and people of this nature, which small practices can't do by themselves. What's the return going to be? Well, you've got the liquidity ASX. As a public company, you can sell your shares at any time. We're planning a dividend policy of 50% profit, working on a 10% turnover margin, and we're planning to pay that after 3 years. The other thing is there'll be capital growth, both from organic and accretion of acquisitions. Accretion of acquisitions means that when we buy a practice, we'll usually buy it on a multiple of 3, 4, 5, 6 times. When it's held in a public company, you use the term of PE, price earnings ratio, and that's usually more like 10, 12 times. So you have what they call an accretion. The float will be the 7th of June 2007, and if you need more information, you can contact me directly, but you really need to look at the prospectus or speak to the brokers. Thank you for listening to me.
Yeah.
Now, the next section of this presentation is you're the judges. As I said, we're not here to be nice. We're here to try and make sure that we can do the best possible presentations. Now, I've covered a certain amount of material there, but it may not answer the questions you need. Now, bear in mind this is a 6-minute presentation for a whole IPO involving something like about $45 million. So you can only do so much in that time. But what did I miss that means you want to go and look up that prospectus as soon as I shut up? So please, criticisms and comments of the presentation, the presenter, or the material presented.
Any questions on the nature of the offer that John's presenting?
Oh, earnings multiples. Oh, okay. Typically with valuation of businesses, run down a profit and loss statement, you end up with a bottom line. So what I'm talking about and how most businesses are sold, non-digital businesses, and particularly up until about 10 years ago, was often on a multiple of the bottom line. So what that is 3, 4, 5 times the sustainable bottom line. So to get a sustainable bottom line, it's a question often of averaging your turnovers, your sales and bits and pieces, and trying to normalise this bottom line. So, and take some of the funnies that might be in the P&L statement. So that's what I'm referring to as a multiple. With the stock exchange, they use a price earnings ratio, which is basically the same sort of a thing. But because it's listed on the stock exchange and the security, the ratio is somewhat higher. So instead of a practice being valued at 5 times its bottom line, it now might be 10 times its bottom line, which of course is a capital gain and accretion in the business.
One was about the competitive landscape. Maybe talking about what the competitors are doing and maybe what's different. And then also just not understanding veterinary sciences, what's maybe the future outlook in the vet world, either through technology or changes.
The competitive landscape, there's something like 2,500 practices in Australia, and most of them are fairly small, usually 1 to 3, 4 vets. Some very good ones. There is no other public company in Australia. We are the first. Some did form later on, but I'll talk about that afterwards. So that's the competitive scale. The industry was somewhat cottage industry, but at this time is going through very much a technological change. We're getting CT scanners, MRIs, specialist areas. We're getting specialist veterinary laboratories developing. Ultrasound scanning is becoming much more common in practices these days. Computer recording, we would be one of the first practices to go paperless. But it's becoming more and more common, and our computer programs nowadays will hold every bit of information from all the owner's details to all the pet's history, including things like laboratory results, photographs, x-rays, and all this sort of thing.
What are all the benefits of owning a bunch of practices? Like, why is it a good business plan to buy a bunch of practices?
Economy of scale, and what that will do is that we can give better career paths to our staff, a better future to our staff, better morale, hopefully less suicides, and of course this then reflects through to client and patient care.
Yeah, I had a question. You mentioned that, I think I just can't recall correctly, but did you say it was 40 million sponsor capital and then you raised 35 million pre-IPO before it listed?
No. Yeah, no, we're out to raise, we have 14 million from the bank they've agreed to, subject to conditions precedent, and we're raising 30 on the exchange, and it will do the things I mentioned before. Yep. So You can only do so much in a short amount of time, but the idea is to give you sufficient interest that, hang on, I might go and find out a bit more about veterinary science or go and look at the prospectus. David.
So, John, this would have been one of the early so-called roll-ups. We've seen some of that in pharmacies and other distributed small businesses. We have now the benefit of hindsight, and there's a couple of things that are there for me. One is the partner selection. So you touched on Keith, your partner in crime with this, the entrepreneurial piece, which is around putting all of that together, and many in this room are they're living that now. And then once it's all happened, the hard work of running organisations, building culture, understanding strategy and vision and all those things. So maybe a comment just in this extraordinary opportunity to sort of cast back and now come back to 2022. What would you have changed? How important was the selection of partner, and were the people that started it the right people for running it?
I don't think it would have changed that, and I'll comment the first part in what I'm going to talk about with a sequel to what happened after the float. Is that okay?
Yep.
A couple of things I might ask. With the presentation, I'm assuming, covered most of the things you need to start with. But was the presentation clear? Was the speech slow enough? Any comments? Because these things are very important. Quite often, I get in a hurry and I speak very quickly.
I thought that the presentation was it took me a while to know was about vets. It took me also a while to understand that what you're trying to do is to put a bunch of vet companies, vet clinics together to get scale, to get this. I also wasn't clear on how much profitability that would actually be scale, like putting them together would give you. I appreciate though that you told me straight what the returns would be and how it would be paid out, right? And the fact that I would have liquidity. That if I put money in there, I would have shares, go to IPO, and I could own a piece of that, I could sell it, I could go to market. So I could choose to hold the shares and get dividends and wait for the growth. I've done all that. But it was just that it took a little longer for me a tiny bit of time for me to know what vet science is and the power of scaling it out. Now we sit on this side and we know it was very successful. We knew you were pioneer in that and things really went off. We know that. But if I was back in time, I'll be going, oh, that's it. I just would like to know a bit more about the power of putting it all together. That's my own comment.
And a lot of that is in the prospectus and so on too. And as you would know with the prospectus, you've got to be very, very, very careful what you write. And we found that later on, especially when we did the merge. I might, if it's okay now, just duck in quickly to the sequel of what happened, because a few things went right and a few things went wrong and a few things are now coming right. I'm very pleased to say. So we floated, which is all very exciting. The shares listed, I think we listed them, and I didn't mention it. I should have said the shares were going at $1 each. They actually listed and went to $1.17 on the first day and then floated back and up and down as these things always do. But we went ahead with our plans. We rebranded the practices and gave them a nice fresh outlook from some of the ordinary signs, painted inside and out, updated the equipment, not to get too fancy, but to make sure that people had the good equipment they wanted, and set up the support office to be support for the staff. We didn't call it support office at the time. We called it actually head office or administration office or something, and I got sick of the title because I thought it was fairly stupid. And we came up with the corny name of support office to remind us in the office what our job really is, because our clients were looking after the staff. So we spent a lot of time working on the vision. We'd had the vision from the previous 15 practices that we were running, so we spent a lot of time on the vision and the core values and demonstrating these things to people, and above all else, we tried to live them. So that was all going very nicely. By the way, the GFC hit 2 months after we floated, but we didn't notice. We just kept going head down, bum up, and go like hell as you do in these things. And after about 15 months, we decided to... Well, actually, what happened was our chairman came across a very good presentation, which I would suggest to all of you. Vern Harnish, the growth guy, and the one-page business plan. So anyway, the chairman suggested cut a long story short, that we should have a look at this. We did. We bought the books on it. We couldn't afford the courses. So, in fact, Glenn studied it up and led the team. And we used that program and really stuck to it. I can talk about the program at another time to go through, but I think it's what built it. We spent a lot of time on staff training, and particularly some work on the multipliers and diminishers to try and build our staff, to build our culture. We also taught the staff the business. Now, this comes back very much from open book management and Jack Stack and what he did in the US, where his staff with open book management actually saw the profit and loss statement. This takes a lot of people to get used to the idea of a profit and loss statement, but we weren't making that much money. In fact, our staff said, "Is that all you earned out of it?" I said, "Yeah, and we're going to pay the debts as well." So, yeah, it wasn't a terribly high income type business, but it was nice and solid. It goes through recessions reasonably well, and it's better these days because pets are such an important part of the family. So we actually taught the people what a P&L looked like, and then also said to them, "Hey, listen, you can apply this to your budgets at home." Whether they did or not is another matter, but at least we tried to teach them the business. So when they wanted a wage rise or they left the air conditioner running, they knew where the expenses were, where the money came from, and how to adjust things so they could understand it. So then with the presentations, we ended up with the staff being proud of where they worked. And there was a lot of opportunities. We had people come in as nurses, veterinary nurses, trained up as veterinary nurses because it's a 4-year course, and became practice managers, area managers, and went on to things in support office. We had one guy actually who was doing vet science at Queensland Uni. He worked with a nurse and then worked in as a vet, eventually became a practice manager. He then left us, and now he and a few other colleagues run a most unique practice in Australia, and extremely well, on all just exotic vets. Snakes, lizards, turtles, spiders, and he does well with it. We had a number of the vets go through to practice management, we call them practice directors, and we also introduced a profit sharing scheme for them, and where they could buy into a profit sharing scheme. To cut a long story fairly short, we built laboratories, so we had our own internal laboratory, and some of the staff would actually transferred across from general practice to that, and we expanded the emergency centre. So these people had so many more opportunities. We introduced a mental health program. I didn't suggest it. Actually, it was one of our HR ladies who had come to as a nurse and worked her way through and became head of HR. She introduced this mental health program where people could receive consultations at the company's expense. I've got no idea what it was for or who it was. She controlled the whole thing with the company that was doing it. We just signed the checks and no questions asked. So that was great. That all went along for about 5 or 6 years, and we expanded the business, and we in fact grew it to a market capitalisation, which means the value on the stock exchange, add up all the shares, multiply it by what the shares are worth, and it was about $300 million. We started with a cap of about 30 odd million. So that was in 6 years. We then decided to merge with Pet Barn because we'd had a lot to do with Pet Barn, and there's a lot of synergies involved. That was a fairly interesting sort of a process, but we merged with Pet Barn to expand the whole business, and that's probably another story. What we did do is we appointed, and I was in it as much as anybody else because I was on the board of Greencross and I was on the DD committee, the chairman of Pet Barn. He was a major shareholder. He was the chairman, his executive CEO as well, to head this up. And we appointed one of our directors as the chairman of the company, who was very experienced, the chairman. However, the CEO turned into a narcissist and the board walked him after about 12 or 15 months. The chairman fell off his bike somewhere in Melbourne on a tram track and was out of action. And the HR of the business went down. And it was sad to see. It went down. A number of us had dropped off the board because you're getting a number of companies. There were 3 companies actually merged eventually. And so a number had to get off the board. We ended up with a new board, of course, all the bright sparks, some lawyers and accountants, so they have no idea about people, none at all, to the extent actually that they cheesed off a number of our senior staff who went off and started an opposition company and did fairly well at it too. So the whole thing went down. At that stage, they decided to sell it off to a venture capital company, the Australian arm of TPG. And I can assure you that didn't do me a lot of good because I'd dealt with them before. I did not have a nice attitude. However, I got approached by one of the directors and the CFO and said, shut up, John, because it's the best worst alternative. If this doesn't go through, the board's got to find another $100 million to fix the balance sheet. Just put up with the takeover, so I did, and I got out completely. I'd worked my way out work-wise anyway, and financially got out of the whole company completely. So the whole thing then was sold to TPG for about 2/3 of what its maximum value was on the stock exchange. And we'd got this company with mergers and everything to an ASX 200, which is just over $1 billion. So, a bit disappointing. So anyway, they took it over, and what's now happened is that they have in fact learnt that people matter, which is really interesting. I'm really pleased to see, and the reports I'm getting back from the staff now is that they've rebuilt the HR of the business. They're starting to look after people. They've brought in new programs. They've expanded programs we had that they dumped, like career. We had some new graduate training programs. Yeah, they dumped a lot of this stuff. Well, they brought it all back in. They've now built training centres, and I hear on the grapevine that they're trying to sell it for $3.5 billion. So my message here is that if I and we did it, and it was a team that did it, you can too. But look out for people. You must absolutely keep your eye on the ball one way or the other. But you also have to recognise that as founders, we outgrow, or the job will outgrow us. I was about to say we outgrow our usefulness, but that's probably true too. The classic example was one of the things I did was start the IT department. The IT department outgrew me. So we got somebody in, actually was a vet, fairly experienced in IT and writing programs and doing all sorts of really interesting stuff. He ran it for a while, then we had to go to systems engineers. So, I sort of stepped back, but I took on a lot of other roles. And as we developed those roles, I stepped back out of them as well. So we got more specialist people in, like property managers and all this sort of thing. So I think it's really, really important that as founders, we decide what our place is in this organisation, and then we step back out, because there is no shortage of founders that have destroyed their dream.
Amen.
Badly so. Thank you.
Hey, would you change anything?
I guess with the experience, we would have looked more. Well, we did. The CEO became a narcissist, and people would work with him for 15 to 20 years. And to make matters worse, when the board marched him, they grabbed the CFO and put him in the role. And he made a complete mess of the balance sheet, a CFO. He eventually left the country and went back to England. And he seemed like a hell of a nice bloke. So, yeah, you'd change some of this. The one thing I really would change is try and enforce a bit more of culture. But when you're dealing with lawyers and accountants that only understand numbers and not people, yeah, you got your head up against a brick wall. So the big thing that went wrong was people. But I'm pleased to say that has now improved. And I got pretty upset about this stuff. And one of the staff I was working with said to me one day, she said, well, you might get upset, John, but get over it. She said, what you guys did gave us opportunities. We never would have got elsewhere. So get over it, John.
Okay, guys. If you just get the summary of this, a guy starts as a vet, he's going to university as a vet, and then he stands before you and say, well, that idea of mine now is worth around $3 billion. Did you get that? In one lifetime. What's the return on that? What's the return on that? Now, of course, then he goes like, I built the company, then we did this, then we did that, and then we tried to IPO, and this happened, and then that happened. Life. And this is why having people of this caliber come in and just be so humble. To say, I'll have breakfast with you, I'll have dinner with you, let's talk about it, let's do this, let's do that. It's tons of experience. Now we have a person here in this room right now negotiating to sell $1 billion company. The guy's in the room. Whoa. He's in the room. Yeah, you told him, like you see him. Right, he's in the room. Okay? They're negotiating to do $1 billion company. There's another guy here who is creating a business system. He's gonna be worth maybe $10 billion. He's in the room too. Who? He's in the room. You gotta talk to people. You gotta go out and find out. Now the numbers are staggering, right? The numbers like what? Well, you gotta imagine it first, then you gotta start talking to people, and it's what I said before. So guys, what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go back to the format. So there's gonna be 2 judges. We're gonna go to the first pitch. The pitch is gonna be mic'd up. So Serena's already been mic'd up. I love Serena playing. Ninja.